Welcome to the number one podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not on the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
Just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're gonna lose. Coming down the stretch, you're gonna lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here, continuing our march to the Big Ten. Today we continue with a brand new, and I mean that as a program and as a roster, a Big Ten team, the number 12 USC Trojans. We'll discuss whether USC can get it rolling on the court and how many games before head coach Eric Musselman rips off his shirt. Before we begin, a quick word of thanks to all of you who support the show through one-time donations and on a recurring basis. Remember, for only $1 a show, or $1 a week, I should say, you can help keep us rolling along. That's even less than $1. We do like 3 shows a week during the regular season. It can keep us rolling, so we give you all the pre- and post-game analysis, recruiting updates, all that stuff you love with the content for the Michigan State Spartans. So if you like what we do and appreciate it, and you think we're worth at least $1, we'd appreciate it if you just head on over and give us some support at the support page at tffinots.com/support. You either do a one-time or recurring basis. Also, we will have the Beat Rod contest, 1 through 18. Oh boy, went back in time there. As we're grinding through these Big Ten previews, I hope the league doesn't get much bigger. I mean, it's 1 through 18. That takes a long time. So we're going through 1 through 18. You have to make your predictions. Send them in to me at eric@tffinots.com. Make sure you put your name, obviously. The tiebreaker is how many points Michigan State scores against Michigan. The winner gets a $100 gift certificate for apparel at Nudge Printing or whatever else you want to get Nudge Printing. They have all kinds of other cool stuff like they've got the Fatheads equivalent for the walls. They got stickers you put on your decals, you put on a computer or wherever. And of course, all the great stuff that, hoodies, zippy, 3/4 zips and quarter zips and all that kind of stuff too. Great stuff. And now hats. So they're going to have that too. So let's talk about the Trojans. Enter Andy Enfield is left after bad last year. They're only 15-18 last year, 8-12 in the Pac-12. As you may recall, the year before they played Michigan State in the first round and gave Michigan State all they could handle. So it was kind of an up and down tenure for Enfield. For 11 years, he was in and then out as far as the tournament. Ended up leaving and just going to take the SMU job. So I don't know if he was fired so much as maybe sort of a mutual parting of ways. Anyway, they got the tournament 5 years under him, made an Elite 8 run in 2021, made the Sweet 16 another year. But for a program that's a kind of sleeping giant, they remind me of a number of teams in the Big Ten where there's a potential there, but they sort of don't always live up to it. So they brought in Eric Musselman, and he has a lot of personality. He's coming from Arkansas and took it after a crazy year at Arkansas where they went 16-17, all kinds of weird stuff going on we'll just leave it at that. And led to problems at changes at Kentucky, BYU, all sorts of coaching carousel moves happened because of it. But he was very successful at Arkansas and Nevada. He went to a couple Elite 8s, a couple of Sweet 16s. He coached in the NBA. And so there's every reason to think that he can be successful in Los Angeles with a program that seems to have some support. We had Mr. Caulfield on earlier, and so it seems like they've got some chance to do some damage in the Big Ten as well.
Yeah, this is a program that for as long as I've followed college sports, so, 45 years, well, or more, actually a little more than that. USC basketball has been spoken about as a sleeping giant. And occasionally they've had these little spikes where they actually were getting close to quote unquote giants. You mentioned Andy Enfield managed to get them to an Elite Eight. They had some other brief flashes. There was the Harold Miner era in the early 90s. He was the first baby Jordan. And most of the guys who were labeled that didn't pan out, including Harold Miner. They had some good teams under Tim Floyd, and MSU fans will remember MSU vanquished one of those teams in, I think it was the 2009 tournament run in the second round. And I would submit that USC team MSU beat the second round largely down to Travis Walton having the best shooting day of his career. That team, which had a number, I think multiple NBA players, that USC team, was probably the best team Michigan State saw up until they faced North Carolina in the national title. That's how I saw it.
Yeah.
It was insane that USC team was seated where they were. So they've had moments. We did 2 years ago, Michigan State.
They were a good team.
Played them in a second round game, right? Or
Yeah,
was that
second round,
first
yeah,
round
right.
game. Second round game.
Yep.
No, it was a first round game. It was a
Yeah, because
first
they played
round game.
Marquette in the second round. Yeah, it was the first round
That's
game.
right. It was a first round game. And again, very, very good team. Michigan State handled them reasonably easily, but that was a good team. And the year before that, they'd been to the Elite Eight. So, well, 2 years before. So, USC basketball is not a nobody kind of program. You know, they've had moments of success. The problem has been sustaining it.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's funny. I think the reason that people have thought of them as a sleeping giant is they look at Southern California and they say, well, this area produces so many great players. UCLA only has so many roster spots available.
Yeah.
So why shouldn't USC have a lot of talent? And that makes sense to some degree. The problem is it has failed to account for the fact that kids from Southern California have over the years been very comfortable leaving the state. Arizona, especially under Lute Olson, made a living with Southern California players. Lots of other Pac-10 and Pac-12 programs have done that. And some of those kids go across the country and play places. So it's generally not considered to be all that difficult to pull a guy out of Southern California to an out-of-state school. So it's not as if USC just automatically has dibs on all the guys UCLA doesn't want to take.
Right.
You know? And then I think it's also the culture of the school. The fact of the matter is USC is at least as much as Michigan and Ohio State, if not more, a football-first school. I would say they're actually probably closer to Penn State than Michigan State or Ohio State in that regard.
Yes.
The difference being they've had enough to at least have occasional bursts of success that are greater than what Penn State's been able to have.
Yes.
So I think the question is, does the right coach and now becoming part of a better basketball league where sport matters more, like the Big Ten, do those two factors combine to allow USC to reach their potential as a program? We will see. You know, Andy Enfield was a highly regarded guy when USC got him. He was coming off Dunk City at Florida Gulf Coast. And, you know, you look at his tenure, boy, it's hard for me to believe this. He was there 11 years. It doesn't seem that long ago that Florida Gulf Coast was doing their thing. He was at USC for 11 years. But then you look at it, he only makes a tournament 5 times. Yeah, he has the Elite Eight run. Yes, he has a Sweet 16 in another season. But I don't think you can look at the Andy Enfield era and say mission accomplished. I think it was, okay. And last season was a big disappointment. We haven't even uttered the name Bronny James. Bronny James was part of this program last year. And the expectations were they had Boogie Ellis coming back. They then brought in the guy, Isaiah Collier, who we'll talk about in a second, who's supposed to be the top point guard recruit in the country, and then Bronny James. I think people figured USC was going to have an outstanding backcourt. It didn't really play out that way. So, Enfield, you asked the question, did he leave or did he get fired? I think it was, I don't know if I believe he would have been fired. Yes. I don't know if I believe he would have been fired. I'm not tuned in enough to know that for sure. I kind of had my doubts that they would have canned him. But I think he saw the writing on the wall that he was in a situation where he was going to have to win big or else. If it wasn't this offseason, it might be next one. So he opted to start over, move to SMU. He's joining the ACC. So they've kind of, at least temporarily, while that conference still exists, get a new lease on life. And Enfield can kind of rebuild his career in a new place. And USC responds by getting Eric Musselman. Now, you mentioned Musselman had a wild year at Arkansas. And I won't go into all the rumors either, but suffice it to say, it was a tumultuous year in Fayetteville. And not least of which, as an outcome of that, was a 16-17 season. And that, look, Eric Musselman, I don't think he was getting fired, but it was crazy, to say the least. And as you noted, his departure then sets off this chain reaction of dominoes, which end up with John Calipari in Arkansas, Mark Pope in Lexington, and BYU hiring a new coach. So a lot of things happen as a result of that move. But you can't let that last year kind of taint your view of what Musselman's been able to do as a coach. He had, between Nevada and Arkansas, he had 6 straight NCAA tournament appearances. In those 6 trips, 2 Elite Eights, 2 Sweet 16s. He can also sell to recruits the fact that he's been an NBA head coach for 3 years. So I think there is zero doubt this is, and USC's had some decent, Tim Floyd was a very good college basketball. He had been great at Iowa State. He struggled in the pros, but then he was really good for a while at USC. I think Enfield is a solid coach. So they've had good coaches, but I think there's an argument that Eric Musselman might be the best college basketball coach they've ever had, at least in the modern era. I think that's a fair statement. Will he stay there long enough for it to matter? And will he be able to make his magic work? Because he's a guy who relies very heavily on transfers. At least that was his MO at both Nevada. So he was doing it even before the portal came into existence. He was heavy on transfers there. And obviously he continued to do that with the portal at Arkansas to mostly very, very good effect. Can he continue to do that in South Central Los Angeles? We'll see. But I think there's an argument that USC really benefited from this whole shift in the coaching department. We'll see what it means in terms of wins and losses.
Yeah, and I would say the only thing I'd add is that USC strikes me as far as a school. It is, I agree, this like Penn State, except they do not have the gross indifference to basketball that Penn State does. And so that is to their advantage, right? I mean, they do care
a little, not much. They don't. That's why I actually backed away from comparing them to Michigan and Ohio State, because even though I think those schools certainly aren't as passionate about basketball as some other Big Ten schools, they care much more about it than USC does for Penn State. I would agree USC is a little better off than Penn State. Very few places at the high major level are worse. At Southern California, I mean, and I'm sure there are going to be points I get into this as we look at some of these games, these late night games from the West Coast, conference games now, mind you, this year, and we see very indifferent crowds at some of the West Coast schools, which is what I think we will see, at least at times in certain places. It's just not, the fan bases are not what we are used to in the Big Ten.
Right, yeah.
So I think I
would just say it from an administrative standpoint, they seem to care more than Penn State does. Penn State.
And that's true. Yeah. The Musselman hiring.
Yeah, right. Exactly. They care enough to do that. Yeah, for sure.
And they went out and they got Enfield when he was as hot a name as there was. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
All right, so we're gonna go. This may be a longer episode. We'll try and keep it brief.
Yeah.
We're gonna go through departing players and who was cleaned house, and boy, it was the whole place. Brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, which only reminds me that not only do you have to make sure windows are clean, but make sure they're not broken. My son's friend came over the other day and got a lure stuck in he was practicing casting off our deck. I think my son's the one who got caught in the tree, and as he's yanking it back, he pulls it back and it whips back past his head. He ducks out of the way, and the lead weight went right through our window. And so we have a nice shattered window. So, honest mistake, but it's kind of, I guess that's why you have double pane. But so the nice thing is it was a clean window. So now we'll have to get a new window. So make sure that not only your windows are not cracked, but make sure they're nice and clean. So check out the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They are in the greater Grand Rapids area, and they can take care of you. They do fantastic work. They're super nice, meticulous. They spend a couple hours cleaning everything. They can do power washing as well. They get up on the ladder right next to the house as opposed to like standing 20 feet away. So make sure it gets nice and clean, and they're not like pounding with super high pressure where it's going to damage anything, your paint job or your vinyl siding. So check them out. You can find ways to contact them at the support page at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. 15% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. That's the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. All right, so here we go. Boogie Ella, 6'3" guard. Michigan State fans remember him probably from a couple years ago. He's a guy that they were able to contain. He was definitely the player they had to keep in the gutter and did a good job. He averaged 16.5 points a game and 43, 42, and 72 shooting last year. And he's gone.
Yeah, out of eligibility.
Right. He's gone for the other reasons.
Last season's struggle was not on him. 16.5 points on very efficient shooting. This guy was a good player. They didn't have the team success they had the year prior.
Then we have Joshua Morgan, 6'10" center, mainly a defender, averaged 2.3 blocks a game, along with 5.7 points and 3.7 rebounds a game.
Again, out of eligibility, was a solid defensive player for them. Not a lot on the offensive end.
DJ Rodman, 6'6" forward, transferred to Washington State. He left to go to the Pac-2, I guess. He averages...
No. Other way around. He transferred in last year.
Transferred in from Washington. Yeah,
from Washington State.
Yeah. And so he graduated, right? Yeah. So.
Yep.
He averaged 8.4 points a game and 5 rebounds a game, starting 28 games for SC.
Yeah, decent. You recognize the last name. Decent player, not spectacular as an addition for them from a fellow Pac-12 school.
Then we have Isaiah Collier, 6'5" point guard, who was a lottery pick this summer draft, averaged 16.3 points a game and led the team in assists.
Yeah, but I will say this. That's a good scoring number, and he led the team in assists, as you said, but the efficiency was not there. He really struggled with decision-making. His jump shooting was inconsistent. You love the size. 6'5" is a point guard, and he's a good athlete. That all checks out in terms of his pro potential. But I think it's fair to say his play overall was at least a little bit of a disappointment. There was reason to suspect that he would be that rare kind of freshman who comes in and immediately is a major impact guy and makes you better. And that was just not how it worked out. They were not a better team. And, we talked about this a lot over the last few years at Michigan State. So much hinges on your point guard, not just in terms of what their production is, but the knock-on effect that they have in making their teammates better. And I think it was fair to say Isaiah Collier didn't do as much of that as they thought he would.
Moving along to Bronny James, you might recognize the last name, his famous dad, LeBron. 6'4" guard, missed some time last year. Was last year the one he had the heart condition? I just can't. I feel like it's like a million years ago that happened. Yeah, so he had heart condition, cleared to play. Eventually, when he started playing, he averaged 4.8 points a game. So naturally, he was drafted in the second round of the NBA.
And is going to be not in the G League or on a two-way, but with the Lakers for the whole year. Look, you could sum it up as just saying the hype dwarfed the actual production. I won't spend too much time on this, but I saw Bronny James when he was entering his freshman year of high school in an AAU game against Damani Bates. So height versus height, right? The difference is Amani Bates on that day in front of LeBron and cast of thousands at that game. It was a huge crowd for an AAU game. Amani James looked like a pro. He looked like Kevin Durant. Ronnie James didn't look like a kid who had much more than maybe a mid-major future to my eyes. And I never saw anything that suggested otherwise. Despite the fact that he would have, he played in the McDonald's All-American games. He has no business objectively being in that game. He plays at USC, and I'd give the kid a pass for some of the health issues for sure. But the fact is, he wasn't very effective.
Right.
And then, he's going to get a ticket to an NBA roster for at least a year or two. A lot of that is not his fault. And that's why I do find some of the criticism to go a little bit too far. He didn't necessarily ask for all of this. But the facts are, there was an expectation that he was going to be at least an effective college player and maybe even a starter for USC, and he wasn't that.
Are there any more James sons who are in the pipeline?
There is. In fact, in this year's class, Bryce James has just been controversially ranked. All three released their recent update to the class, and they've ranked him the number 100 spot. And his production in the EYBL this spring was, to say the least, wanting. There are guys ranked behind him that it's just insane. Absolutely insane. But yes, there's one more.
It is weird because there are tons and tons of players whose fathers played in the NBA or whatever, and I don't understand the
nobody did this with Michael Jordan's kids.
Right, Jordan's kids. I don't know. Is it because Jordan didn't push his kids promoted as much?
Yeah, I think that frequently in the past there have been situations where the parent wasn't as involved. And look, I've got no problem with LeBron James being involved in the lives of his kids. I think that's great, actually.
Sure.
I personally witnessed him in that game I was talking about, which was several years ago now. I personally watched him, and that seemed to me to be nothing more or less than an extremely enthusiastic parent who was wanting to see their kid play. And he wasn't on the refs. He wasn't talking trash. None of that. I have no criticism of that. I don't even think LeBron is necessarily, he's probably responsible for the NBA thing. But the rest of it, I don't really put on him.
Yeah.
I put that on this industry of basketball that has arisen. Because, man, the Jordan comparison is a good one. One of his kids, I can't remember if it was both of them, I believe walked on at Illinois. And that's kind of where it was, Like there was so people were interested in him, but once it became apparent that, he's not ever going to be his dad, that stuff goes away. You don't see, football's a different sport, but, Barry Sanders' kids haven't dealt with that kind of stuff. It's a weird one-off. Like we've never really seen anything like this.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure everything that goes into it because, LeBron James, for being the all-time great that he is, I wouldn't say is a universally beloved player. He has his critics. We're not talking about the way that, say, Magic Johnson or even Jordan were viewed when they were players with almost universal acclaim.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure why this has happened. It's a weird phenomenon to me. That maybe the fairest thing to say is that his sons are maybe just good enough to get to that line where people can gush and the hype storm can start and generate clicks. Whereas a lot of the other sons of some of these players, like Jordan's kids weren't even really close to that line. So that might be part of it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose it also, one factor is that he's actually still playing right? And he's playing at a high level.
That too.
And
that
that's so
too. Yep.
that makes so he's in the news more than just like, oh, he's the greatest 3 years ago.
That's
whatever.
That's a fair point. I think you're right. I think that's got something to do with it as well.
All right. Well, we'll keep going down the list of departing players with Vincent Iwuchukwu, 7'1", 235-pound sophomore, averaged 5.5 points a game, 3.8 rebounds a game, played 16 minutes, started 11 games, and transferred to St. John's.
You know, the thing about Andy Enfield's program is he never had problems attracting talent.
Yeah.
He always had, like Eric Mobley was on his team, he's become a star with the Cavaliers. He played for him. You know, he never had problems attracting a good degree of talent. And this kid was another example of that. He was a very highly regarded big man recruit. Some health issues have maybe slowed his development down a little bit, but I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being effective playing for Rick Pitino. Because last year, you know, not eye-popping numbers, but solid. He's starting to get closer to being the player people thought he could be.
Then we have Kobe Johnson, 6'5" guard, transferred to UCLA. He averaged 10.9 points a game, 4.6 rebounds a game, 3.3 assists.
This is a loss. When you lose him to your Big Ten rival, UCLA Bruins, that's a big loss. And seriously, Kobe Johnson was a good player. I think he was a reserve on the team MSU beat the tournament 2 years ago. And then last year he was a starter. But this is a guy who's already been a solid all-around player, can do pretty much everything. He can help you in every phase of the game. But the general feeling is he's got another gear or two to hit, and he's got 2 more years to play. So definitely a loss for them. And his addition, you know, as a sneak preview, his addition to UCLA's roster is one of many reasons why people are pretty optimistic about UCLA bouncing back this season. One of the reasons for that is they got Kobe Johnson.
Brandon Gardner, 6'8" forward, played only a game as a freshman. He transferred to Arizona State.
Yeah, you know, didn't see a lot from him, so hard to know what they're losing. But, you know, interesting that he went to another high major.
Yeah, former Pac-12 team.
Yep.
Arrington Page is 6'11" big, transferred to Cincinnati, averaged 3.1 points a game, 2.1 rebounds a game last year with in 11 minutes.
Yeah, one thing that Enfield did is he always seemed to have a ton of size. And sometimes it was hard for these guys to really sort out roles between them. And so Page, you know, played a role, 11 minutes per game, not nothing, but it's also not a loss you're looking at and saying, you know, oh boy, what are we missing? I mean, truthfully, the only guy that they lost to another school, and I think might sting, is Kobe Johnson.
Sure.
That's really it.
Moving on to our 10th player, Kajani Wright, 6'9" power forward. He averaged 3.9 points a game, 2.6 rebounds a game as a sophomore, and he's going to join A.J. Hoggard at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, and Kajani Wright, when I talk about talent, he was a guy that was seen at one point as an elite recruit, like a top 25 kind of guy. Michigan State was in on him, but it was a weird one because he said he was very interested in Michigan State. He listed Michigan State a lot. What I understand, Michigan State was never fully in on that one. I think in part because they weren't really, he's an LA native. They weren't really sure that he was interested in leaving. And so his recruitment was an example, in my opinion, of sometimes you do see guys use schools like Michigan State to boost their profile to an extent.
Right.
And the interest isn't necessarily real. I would say his performance over his 2 years at USC has not been suggestive of a major impact guy. He's probably be in the rotation somewhere for Vandy, but I wouldn't be betting on stardom based on what he's shown thus far.
And the final departing player is Uzziah Sellers, 6'5" guard, transferred to Cincinnati, averaged 5.2 points a game on 43 shooting.
Yeah, and you know, not bad as a 6'5" freshman wing, or sophomore wing. 43% from three. You know, Sellers may be able to help at Cincinnati, but again, didn't show enough at USC that your feeling if you're a Trojan fan is, boy, we really lost someone.
And then just a reminder, not only is Nudge the printing the one that provides all our apparel for our prizes, but it's a great place to get your own stuff. You can head on over. They have the new hats they've just introduced, and they're super cool. They have the sort of Spartan camo on the inside brim. They are unlike most other Spartan hats where they just have it printed on. These are all custom made. Gabe spent 3 to 4 months designing these hats once he was given the green light from Michigan State, because of course he has to have a licensing agreement with them. He's the only non-sort of big name to have a licensing agreement with Michigan State. So support your fellow Michigander and Michigan State alum, Gabe and Brittany, over at Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. You can find ways to connect through our support page, or just head on over to nudgeprinting.com. And again, super comfortable, all kinds of great apparel, great logos, stuff you can get for winter, for fall, for spring, whatever, even summer. You can get 20% off if you type in Final Four just as one word at checkout. And so we'll go through the returning players, which apparently Harrison Honery did not get the memo that you're supposed to leave USC this season. So he's the only one returning. He already never got around to filling out his transfer portal paperwork. 6'9", 215-pound forward, averaged 3.3 points a game, 2.8 rebounds a game in 14 minutes, shot 33, 28, and 80.
Yeah, most of his shots came from three, so he definitely sees himself as a stretch four. You know,
28%.
Right. And he played a role. He was in the rotation, 14 minutes per game. You're solidly in the rotation. But you have to wonder anytime you've got a new coach coming in, and presumably Musselman expressed interest in keeping him. But you got to wonder where you sit in the pecking order. So it will be interesting to see if he's at least playing a similar role to the one he played last year under Enfield.
I think he's just a lot like me, and he just doesn't like to move. I hate moving. He's like,
well, that's it. That's his motivation. Well, Musselman obviously.
Oh yeah.
Let him stay. So.
So let's go over the newcomers, of which obviously there are quite a few. We'll begin with Desmond Claude, 6'5" guard from Xavier, averaged 16.6 points a game on 43, 24, and 79 shooting. So clearly his 3-point shooting is not good. He averaged 5 free throws a game, which is or attempts per game. So the guy probably gets around the rim a little bit, and he had a 3.2 assists per game.
Yeah, and so I think there's a reasonably good chance that we're going to see him at least get a shot at the starting point guard spot.
Sure.
That doesn't seem to be entirely what he is. You know, the scoring number is great. And if you're Musselman, I think you like what he brings as a 6'5" guy at that position who can get to the rim, can finish, draws contact, 5 free throw attempts per game. Not bad for a non-center. The big bugaboo here is the 3-point shooting number. 24% just isn't going to get it done. But look, I think there's every reason to believe that Claude is going to play a significant role, and I would think he's going to at least get a turn as the starting point guard.
Next is Bryce Pope, 6'3" wing, played at San Diego last year. He averaged 18.3 points a game on 43, 33, and 82 shooting.
Yeah, and transferring up, not San Diego State. This is University of San Diego.
Oh, right, yeah.
So good numbers, good scorer. Again, you got to wonder about the consistency with the 3-point shot. But given his experience, I think there's a decent shot he pushes for a starting role as well. And they're going to hope that he can just find the range a little bit more consistently.
Josh Cohen, 6'10", 220-pound transfer from UMass, averaged almost 16 points a game and 6.8 rebounds a game last year, shot 54, 34, and 70.
Interesting player, despite his size, you're not talking about a big physical presence. He's not a rim protector. But this is a team, it's the real switch for USC fans, I think, that might be a little bit disconcerting, is they're going from a program where there was tons of size available. I mean, I think we ticked off 3 or 4 guys on last year's roster that were 6'10" or above.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the standard operating procedure for Enfield. I have a lot of size. We're going from that to a team that doesn't have very much size at all. And so Cohen, like it or not, might have to play the 5. He's not really a traditional 5. He's rebounding numbers at UMass were decent, but offensively, he's more of a finesse guy. So I think he's going to play because of his size, and obviously he showed he can be productive as well. But how he fits into their thing is going to be interesting.
All right, not to be confused with the Catholic Church on Saginaw, I believe, in East Lansing. St. Thomas. The next player is St. Thomas, 6'7" forward from Northern Colorado, averaging almost 20 points a game, almost 10 rebounds a game last year in the 2 years at Northern Colorado. He previously was at Loyola Chicago, and he shot 47, 33, and 87 with a lot of threes.
Yeah, again, interesting player. So he plays 2 years at Loyola Chicago, fairly nondescript. Transfers to Northern Colorado, which is a low-level D1 program, and is very productive, almost a 20-10 guy. Shot a lot of threes. 33% on a lot of volume is okay. You'd hope for better, but it's not terrible. But the rebounding, I think, is what's going to stand out here. If he can rebound at anything close to that level he had at Northern Colorado, then you're looking at him as a contender for minutes at the 3 or the 4.
Yeah, certainly interesting. A guy who doesn't do well at a low-level MAC school and then goes and moves down and then has success. Can you come back up to? I shouldn't say low.
Well, they were Missouri. They were Missouri.
I meant Missouri Valley. Yes, not. Yes, sorry, I should know better. Anyway, so then we go on to a familiar name, Terrence Williams, former Michigan player, and this brings a tear to my heart. He's a former Michigan player, averaged 12.4 points a game, 4.5 rebounds a game for a truly terrible team. Shot 43, 40, and 76, and so he will play the 4, but he has trouble guarding athletic wings.
Yeah, and that's the thing that Michigan could never quite solve with him. I remember when they brought him in, they talked about this as a strength. That, well, he's not obviously a 3 or a 4, but he's got the versatility to play both, and he's kind of a jack of all trades guys. And that sounds good. And when you get a guy who can truly fill that role, and there are guys who do, that's a great thing to have. But Williams' problem was, especially I felt defensively, he couldn't really handle either very well.
Yeah.
Some guys his size hang in there at the 4. So I didn't think he did very well. And at the 3, he was just a disaster. And to his credit, last year, during the worst season for Michigan basketball in my memory, he actually cared enough and tried and played hard enough to really produce, even when everything was falling around him. And his numbers were good. 40% from 3. He finally found consistency. That was an area he had struggled with. He worked hard, 4.5 rebounds, had a solid year. I think he's going to be in the rotation somewhere from Michigan. It will be interesting to me to see how they utilize him and how much, because though I think he can help them a bit offensively, I do wonder about the defensive end. And that's always the challenge with him, is where can you kind of hide him?
Not good when people are trying to hide you on the floor. That's always a bad sign.
Yeah, right.
Clark Slachert, 6'1" guard from University of Penn. He averaged 18 points a game on 49, 42, and 82 shooting. It seems like they brought in a lot of people who can shoot the threes.
Well, I'm not well. Let's look back. Williams is an example, but St. Thomas, 33%. Highland was 34. That's okay for a big man. But the guards, Claude, 24%, Pope, 33%. So I think the role this guy has been brought into play is someone who could help them probably off the bench in that one area, because they think that they may need it. He's, despite being 6'1", he's not really a point guard. So the other problem is you're talking about a 6'1" guy playing off the ball for you. What does that mean defensively? That could be a problem, right? Yep. I think the key is, though, if the shooting translates at all, he's going to have a role. That's what I'm pretty sure that's what he's been brought in to do. If he can shoot the three, he can play some type of role for this team.
Then we have Boise State transfer Chibuzo Agbo, 6'7", 215-pounder, averaged 13.7 points a game, 5.1 rebounds a game, shot 45, 41, and 72.
Yeah, and, Boise State, good team and a very competitive Mountain West last year. So how does that translate? You like his size, possibly as a small ball four, possibly as a big wing. Those are good numbers. 41% from three, decent rebounding numbers, decent volume of shooting because he averaged almost 14 a game. You would think he'll be in contention for a significant role, but that's the thing. You look at that and you say, well, how does Agbo compare to Terrence Williams or to St. Thomas? All three of them look like guys who could play the three or the four. Who's going to emerge? It's very difficult to tell. There's reason to be optimistic about him, but who the hell knows?
Well, and it's good, I suppose, if you're Musselman, to have options. Like you don't know who's going to be, but you're like, well, I've got four possibilities, so I'm not too worried about it. Then we have Rayshawn Agee, 6'7", 210-pound transfer from Bowling Green. Apparently, he wanted to play Michigan State at USC instead of as Bowling Green. He averaged 13.3 points a game, 9.9 rebounds a game, and 4 rebounds that were offensive, and shooting 57, 23, and 68.
Yeah. Again, this is a team that's going to be operating without a lot of size. So anybody like Agee who has demonstrated production on the boards or defensively or both, even as an undersized player, probably has a legitimate chance of earning a role because they're going to need help in those areas. It could be a starting role here. This is a team that's going to need rebounding. Offensively, he's mostly an inside the arc guy. That's what I would expect this year as well. But, like with a lot of these guys, intriguing player. He's done some productive things to date, but you don't know how it's going to translate at this level, and you don't know how it's going to translate fitting into the chemistry of this team, whatever that ends up being.
Then Kevin Patton Jr., 6'7" wing, transferred from San Diego State. He averaged 9 points per game, 4.4 rebounds a game, shot 43, 34, and 72.
Yeah, look, if you were able to play significant minutes as a true freshman at San Diego State with all the veteran players they had last year, a team coming off a Final Four, that demonstrates you could play. And there's clearly potential here. 34% from three, that's okay for a true freshman. 4.4 rebounds a game, you like that as a wing. Another guy, again, you've got this endless list of guys, all of whom you can make an argument for as to why they should be a factor, but somebody's going to play and somebody's going to sit. I would say Patton's got a legitimate chance to be one of the guys who plays.
6'6" forward from Yale, another Ivy team, Matt Noling. He averaged 11.6 points a game on 57% shooting from the floor and 62 from the line.
Yeah, I would say that the fact that he was not any kind of a three-point threat and was only 6'6" probably means he's more likely than some of these other guys to be a deeper rotation piece. But it remains to be seen. That's based on just what I said.
Right, yeah. Then we have Wesley Yates, 6'4", transfer from Washington. He's injured and didn't play last year for the Huskies.
Yeah, they think that he's got the potential to develop as a shooter at some point in his career, and decent size for the wing. I don't think he's likely to play a big role this year.
Then we have Isaiah Elohim, 6'5" power wing, who was a top 50 rated recruit nationally. And so I guess he originally was going to Arkansas and followed Musselman to USC.
Yeah. Strong physical player on the wing with size. And again, a lot of talent as befitting being top 50 national recruit. Very strong player. They like his ability to score around the basket.
as is the case with a lot of these guys, the concern is that he needs to develop greater consistency with his deep shot and, in his case, with his handle. But they like his mid-range game. They like the finishing ability. So there's a lot of potential here. What's going to be interesting is, as I've talked about, a lot of competition on the wing for this team. So is a true freshman, even a talented one, and a physically put together one, able to break through that noise and, claim a significant rotation role? I would think he has a chance, because he's a guy Musselman really wants. He's from LA, but he originally committed to him at Arkansas and then followed him back home to USC when Musselman took the job. So I would think Musselman is all in on him.
And finally, a story similar to Elohim is Jalen Shelley, who is a 6'8" small forward, who was originally committed to Arkansas and then is now at USC following Musselman.
Yeah. Now, the story with him is I think he needs to add more strength. They like his upside in terms of his physical tools and his skill set, but needs to get stronger and also needs to learn to play hard on a consistent basis. Given his position, again, there's a lot of guys in line in front of him.
Am I crazy? I feel I counted like 14 players, including the one returning and like 13 newcomers.
Yeah, one of them, and I can't recall off the top of my head which, is actually not on scholarship, but is, an NIL funded thing. And we've now got 15 scholarships as well, so it's no longer.
Does that start this year or is it last year?
I believe so. I believe it goes into effect this year.
All right. Well, this might be difficult. So the Brothers Jesu Gutters sponsor our player who teams need to keep in the gutter. Who in this crowd of this pile of players would you say is the player that they're going to need to keep it in the gutter?
I'm going to bet on Desmond Claude. And I say that because this is a guy who scored almost 17 points a night in the Big East. And yeah, he's got to improve the 3-point shooting, but I'm confident in his playing a lot of minutes, no matter what happens, having the ball in his hands a lot, no matter what happens. And that's probably enough. But you're right. This is going to be one of the tougher ones to call because you got about 7 or 8 guys who theoretically could emerge as that. I'm going to go with Desmond Claude.
Well, the one thing you don't have to worry about, and his question is who you need to call if you need your gutters replaced, cleaned out, or just repaired. Whether it's at your house or your business, you want to check out the Brothers Jesu Gutters. They got you covered anywhere in the state of Michigan, on the west side or the east side of the state. Kurt and his team on the west side, Greg and his team on the east side, the Metro Detroit area, Grand Rapids area. They'll do whatever it takes to take things, that water away from your house so it doesn't cause problems. I've told the story a couple times in the show, but it is so nice not having to refinish my door every year, which I was having to do. I had no idea it was just a simple water issue where I had a bunch of water just pouring off the roof, bouncing off the landing, and got on and just caused water damage. I mean, water is super damaging. And so anyway, getting that away, not causing problems anymore, has made my life so much nicer. And gives me a whole day back because I had to sand down my door every year and restain it and reseal it. So anyway, don't have to do that anymore. Thanks to the Brothers Jesu Gutters. You get 10% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. You can find ways to get their estimates through your support page at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. All right. So this is, I think, not only is it a weird year, as I mentioned before, brand new conference, but also totally brand new team. I mean, for the most part, just the guy who forgot to leave the team. So a new coach, everything's new. It's just a weird year and a weird sort of situation at USC. So I don't know. How do you think things are going to play out here?
Well, I picked them 12, which means they're probably at least on the fringe of the tournament discussion. And that is mostly a bet on Musselman, which I'll turn back to in a second. There's some real talent here. I mean, if you look at the track records of a lot of these guys that he's added through the portal, there's some serious production. Now, some of it is not at the high major level, but some of it is. And I think if you start from that point, you could say, well, he's got enough horsepower here that if enough things break the right way, you could see USC as a tournament team. And I think that's true. There are flaws, though. There are two big ones. The first one is he doesn't have an obvious point guard. I mentioned Claude's probably going to get first shot with that, but I'm not convinced that that's actually his best position. And even though I just picked him as the guy to keep out of the gutter, you wonder sometimes when that role change happens with a guy, does that take away from what he does best as a scorer?
Right.
So that's one issue. And I don't see a lot of other obvious options. I mean, some of these guys are going to end up taking on more ball handling, decision-making roles than they did. Like Pope would be an example of a guy who probably does that by default. But I don't think that's necessarily great for him. So that's a big issue. Another issue is size. They've only got two guys above 6'8", Cohen and Hornery, and neither of those guys is really a stereotypical interior player, right? They're both more finesse guys. So those are two big concerns to have. Questions at the point, questions in terms of your size. But again, I return back to there are a ton of guys who have done it at the collegiate level, and an Elohim, a highly regarded freshman who may be able to help some right away. I think this is going to be one of the most interesting teams to watch early in the season to see how it sorts out. Who are the guys who emerge as starters? Who's a reserve and who's a deep enough reserve they're not playing very much? As I was saying as we went through it, you can go through and make a case for most of these guys, but we know it won't pan out that way. They can't all play a lot. So, and then you're doing this in a new school, playing for a new coach, together with guys who have largely never played together before, never played with each other. It's one thing if you're a portal guy, but you're like, for example, Frankie Fiddler and our big man who've come into Michigan State.
Zapala, yeah.
Yeah, Zapala, as portal guys this year. Yes, they're new to the program and they're new to the coaching staff, but they're stepping into a situation, into a program where other guys around them are very familiar with what Michigan State wants to do. And so they are able to step into a pre-existing structure. This thing, everybody is new. Everybody, even the one returning guy, because you got a new coach. It's entirely new. So you don't know how that will work. All of that said, Eric Musselman has proven to be able to mold teams quickly. Now, last season it didn't happen. But if you go back through the previous 6 seasons to that, it did work that way. He had high roster turnover a lot of the time, and he made it work. So if you're betting on anybody out there to make this situation at least semi-successful, he'd be a good guy to pick. Stylistically, it's going to be interesting to see how they play. His Arkansas teams generally played fast. They tended to force a lot of turnovers. They weren't ever particularly good three-point shooting teams, but they tended to generate a lot of offense with activity at the rim, either finishing there or drawing fouls. That approach, stylistically, would seem to me to be a good fit with this roster because I could see a bunch of guys who have the potential to be effective kind of attacking the basket, maybe not as reliable shooting jumpers. So we'll see if they play the way his teams historically have. Again, we could throw a blanket over a whole bunch of these teams and not, and pick any of them in any order. We'd have as good a chance as anyone to get it right. I don't know whether USC could finish dead last in this league if none of it comes together. And that is a possible outcome. I'm betting on this, which again I'm not going crazy with it. I'm saying on the fringes of tournament discussion, most likely maybe a little bit on the outside. But I'm betting on that largely on Musselman's track record.
Yep. So what I'm hearing from you is they're a lock at the 12th spot in the Big Ten.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually, it's going to be fun. We're already getting kind of used to USC from a football standpoint, now having a basketball, which I guess Michigan State's gonna be traveling down to Southern California to play both those teams, I think, and then they're gonna welcome in Oregon and Washington this season. So
That's right.
Imagine it flip flops next year. So
It'll
be interesting as all with. It's gonna be really hard to keep track of everything, and especially how much there's gonna be definitely a more heavily. You're heavily dependent on the scheduling and where you play home and away teams more than ever before. And so I know that you did not select teams based on that, but that may be as important as anything else. And the hard thing is right now is like, it's hard to know who you want to play home away, who's super important to play home and away, right? That's the other problem.
That's why I'm not even bothering when I put this together. Didn't even bother to look at who's got who home and away, because you can't have any intelligible feeling at this point. You can't have any justifiable opinion as to what's going to be likely to be a tougher or easier home and away game, with a few exceptions. Like, that going to Mackey Arena is not going to be good.
And we're not doing that. Yay.
Right. But you generally, that. Frankly, going to Breslin Center is not going to be easy. Just objectively, forget even the particular teams involved. You would think, and I think it's possible to assume this, that, when Michigan State goes to Southern California, that's a long flight, and you wonder about the impact of that. You especially wonder about the impact of all the travel, as we've mentioned a few times this offseason, for the West Coast teams coming east so often. But I just can't get caught up in that stuff because it's too difficult to sort it all out. And the situations like this, where you got a new coach, a virtually entirely new roster, make it even more difficult to try to figure out who's going to get it together, who isn't. I mean, the sad part is, as basketball fans, one of the things that has been enjoyable over all the years of following it is that you come to know all of these guys.
Yeah.
Even on the opposing teams too. You see guys develop, and you may develop a very healthy dislike for them over 4 years, or maybe
Brad Davison.
Right. Whatever it is. But that's something that's born over time.
Yeah.
And we're losing that. And I'm not saying, and therefore we should change the rules back to the way they were. I'm just saying that is an element that I think matters for fans that is gone. And this USC team is a great example of that. It's like, they don't even know each other. Yeah. Forget the fans knowing them. I mean, we know Terrence Williams because he played at Michigan. And that's it. The rest of these guys are totally unfamiliar. And that's not even dealing with, adding 4 new schools into the conference and what that does and all of it. It's just, it's an entirely different world. And as fans, you've really got no choice if you're going to follow the sport, but to adjust. But this team is a very extreme example of all of those factors.
Yeah. It's a unique situation.
New school of the conference, new coach, entirely new roster.
Yeah. It is hard. I mean, we go to the Big Ten tournament. The fun thing is, a lot of the players because you've seen them all, but now you're going to see them one time, mostly, maybe you've seen them twice. And you've like, I'm unlikely to watch a 9 p.m. Washington USC game. I can tell you that. But maybe I will now that it's Big Ten. I don't know. We'll see. Only so many hours in the day, but it definitely changes things around. And like you said, it's nothing. It doesn't mean that you think it. You can be sad about it. You can wish it wasn't the case, and that's okay. But it doesn't mean that you think it's wrong. You just could say, well, it's not as good as it used to be, or whatever. And that's just the trade-off.
If I were a fan of, say, schools like Iowa or maybe more to the point, Nebraska or Northwestern, schools that historically have not been very successful, there might be a part of me that welcomes this because you say, well, look, all you got to do is catch lightning in a bottle.
Right.
I mean, look
you
at
only get to Purdue
State.
Once. Yeah.
Look at Michigan State. Well, I mean, even the sense that you just happen to get it right in the portal combination one year.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Or that some of the other teams don't get it right that you're competing with. Look at Michigan State football. In 2021, They got it right. Lightning in a bottle. And you had an incredibly entertaining and exciting year. None of us at the time were sitting around lamenting, boy, I really wish. You were excited, right? I'm not arguing for that proposition either. I'm just saying if I was a fan of a team that was not in Michigan State's position or Purdue's, where you're used to success year in, year out, I might kind of welcome this, at least for a minute. Because it gives me a chance. I might feel every year is different. You don't have to worry about, well, that school got a great recruiting class, so they're going to be a problem for 4 years. Now it's how many of those guys are going to be around for 2.
Right. Yeah, and I feel like the biggest loss in the whole thing is actually the fact that the regular season championship is really, I don't want to say meaningless, but it feels like it's
close.
Really pretty close.
Pretty close.
And the problem is I don't feel like the Big Ten tournament feels like a championship either, right? It just feels like some postseason games that warm up. It's not like the long tradition like the ACC where they put all their emphasis there. I recognize there's an NCAA tournament bid.
Yeah.
So that's a hard thing for a Big Ten for you to kind of really know who's the best team. I mean, you may know, you say, oh, it's Purdue or whatever, but it's just hard. It diminishes things.
God help them if they actually do expand the tournament field, the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
Because then you are completely turning the regular season into a giant exhibition process. You're absolutely right. Look, I would say this, in fairness to the Big Ten tournament, I think that it depends on the year. So like this year or the year prior, it really didn't have that feel. And why was that the case? Well, it's because Purdue was clear-cut the best team. Everybody knew that. Tournament wasn't going to change that result. Like last year, nobody thought Wisconsin was a better team. Purdue. There have been the occasional years, and Michigan State's been involved in some of them. 2012, where they played Ohio State in the rubber match after there was a three-way tie in the regular season with those two in Michigan, and then at MSU and Ohio State split the 2 regular season games. That game was a classic. I think Michigan State, when they beat Michigan in 2019, again, Michigan, it was the tri-sweep of Michigan. But again, Michigan was very clearly the number 2 team. They were seen as a real competitor for Michigan State, and Michigan State came back from a deficit and won that thing. So there have been years, and there are others too, there have been years where I felt like it really did matter. But I think what that requires is that the regular season leaves some doubt. Like you've got 2 teams. Well, these teams are pretty close. So if they meet in the finals, that kind of decides which one was actually better, But that's not going to happen every year. And you're absolutely right about the difference for the Big Ten versus leagues like the ACC that have been emphasizing this thing for 60, 70 years. That's never going to be the case in the Big Ten. And as you say correctly, what we've lost in that exchange is the meaningfulness of a Big Ten regular season title. I think an 18-team league, man, the idea that that's going to, with what the scheduling looks like, the impact of that, and then add to it these other things that don't necessarily have anything to do particularly with the Big Ten, but they're just part of the landscape in college basketball in general, namely the portal and roster turnover. It'll be a fun thing for the school that wins it. But they'll still put banners up, but I'm with you. I don't think it can't have the meaning that it did when you were playing everybody twice, or even, I would argue, up until last year. I think it's been a little devalued in recent years as they've gone to 14, but it still meant enough. When you get to 18, it just seems like that's a bridge too far.
Yeah. Well, and that's just, that's a you and me problem more than anything, right?
Like, stuff's going to change no matter how we feel about it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. And that's, whether I think they're the champions or not, well, it doesn't matter. So anyway, on that note, we'll come back on the next show with the number 11 team. And so until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.